Okay, for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about versals. What are versals? A versal is a large decorated letter at the beginning of a section. You've probably seen them in medieval manuscripts. So, for this is the versal for chapter 1 of the Gospel of Mark. How am I going to decorate the versal? Well, for each versal in the Gospel of Mark, I chose to decorate it using a subject from that chapter. So for the chapter 1 versal, I'm going to pick a little passage out of chapter 1 and use that as the subject for decoration. In this case, the passage is, the passage is from the baptism of Jesus, and the passage is, "And the moment he rose from the water, he saw the heavens cleft, and the Spirit coming down upon him like a dove." So that gives me a nice visual subject to hang on to. It's a dove. And remember that the versal is a letter. So in this case, it's the letter T. Now I made use of an artistic reference, which means that I traced it. The artistic reference is a Roman mosaic. I chose a Roman mosaic because Romans are dead and can't sue me. Here I'm writing my letter T for the, and I'm writing a nice big letter for reasons that you'll see later. I'm going to then transfer the design using embossing. Embossing just means that I carve grooves into a piece of paper using a dull metal point like you see here, carving them onto the final piece of paper below, and then that gives me a nice outline, which will be completely invisible when I scan the letter in later on. So that gives me an outline to paint into that will then become invisible. So here I'm going to start painting the dove. This was the first versal that I did in the project, which means that it is, in many ways, the worst versal. The best practice for watercolor, or in this case, diluted ink painting, is to go from light tones to dark. But you can see that I started out pretty dark. You can also see that I did not let the ink dry before going to darker tones, so that there is a bit of intermixing and blurring between shapes. Especially in the dove's back wing there, and you can see as the fast motion video goes along that as the ink dries, the definition on the feathers gets a lot better. Now I'm going to do my T. For each letter, I made up the letter by squishing a bit of the passage into the shape of the letter. So I'm going to take the passage "and the Spirit descending like a dove" and squish that into the shape of the letter T. When you squish calligraphy into a shape like this, that's called a calligram. So every versal, every initial letter, was a calligram made up of a passage from the section that it started out. I then was not satisfied with my dove, so I redid it later in the project with more experience. I redid it using a different reference, a public domain photographic reference of an actual dove rather than a mosaic dove. So I think it's a much more concrete dove. I would squish this dove. Well, maybe I would gently pat it on the back. You can also see that I kept my shapes a bit more separate and waited for it to dry before doing any detail work there. The initial letter itself, the T, the first letter of V, which is the first letter of the chapter, I didn't really see any need to make changes, so I just did the same procedure for that. So I traced it on using embossing, which will disappear when I scan it in, and then I made the letter T out of the passage from the chapter that this is starting out as. Now, you can see I'm about to make a spelling error. Can you see it? That's right, descending. I forgot that there was supposed to be an N there, but it's fine. I can just paint over that with a little bit of gray gouache, and the offending letter, because thankfully I noticed it in time, will disappear, and no one will ever know unless I filmed it, which I did. Oops. And there is the final versal in situ on page 1, and hopefully it reads as a V, as a T, which is part of the letter V, which is the first word in the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark.